I would like to, number one, introduce myself. My name is Taylor, and I have the privilege of working alongside the Our Future Agenda team to support the Engine Room. And the Engine Room itself is designed for all of you who are on this call. It is hosted by us, but we're seeking to drive action and influence the global agenda ahead of key global moments, such as the one that we are in the middle of right now with HLPF, to spotlight the work of young change makers, which I am thrilled to say we will be doing a lot of today. We have a few incredible young leaders who you will hear from throughout this conversation. And we also want to help you lead and contribute and offer opportunities where you can have your voice truly heard and where you can mobilize around key global moments, of which this is only one of many. So this pit stop sits amidst the high-level political forum where leaders will come together to follow up and review on the 2030 agenda. The intention of this session is to support you in becoming increasingly informed and inspired to have your impact in the global agenda. Which brings me to our exciting announcement that we are kicking off this session with, which is the launch of the Engine Room Challenge. Our ambition as we have grown this global forum of young leaders is to amplify the voices of the next generation. And the Engine Room Challenge is yet another way we plan to bring this to life as we invite you to be part of a challenge to world leaders. Now, this Engine Room Challenge is inspired by the Secretary General's call for commitments from world leaders across 6 key thematic areas that you can see on the slide here. And we hope that you will take inspiration from this and then share what is your vision for 2030 and what is your challenge for world leaders to help make this a reality. We need increased ambition, purpose, and passion from young leaders such as yourselves and the world leaders who are currently sculpting this future so that we can create a co-designed intergenerational future together. Now, the form that this will take is that you have the opportunity to submit 400 words or a 3-minute video via the incredible webpage that our colleague has created for this challenge. And in that, you can refer to what you hope for the future, the work that you are currently developing in your initiatives, especially if you're working in the Engine Room in one of our action groups, and then speak directly to world leaders, maybe those leading your country, about the practical actions that you hope to see. Now, I'm excited to share that our very own Danley and Kalechi have prepared example submissions for us to have a look at now. So we will let those play so you can see what your submission could look like.
In line with SDG 8, my vision for China in 2030 includes the establishment of proactive labor market policies to foster an environment where young professionals are appreciated for who we are, not just where we've been. By focusing our national commitments on the SDGs, we can collectively create a future where we leave no one behind. To make this vision a reality, we have to first ensure that before we step into the competitive job market, we're armed with the tools to protect ourselves and advocate for fair treatment. We must advocate for mandatory courses in universities that educate young people on our rights in the workplace. Understanding labor laws, contracts, and dispute resolution processes will empower us to safeguard our rights. In addition to that, we need a support system that empowers new graduates to explore our passion and make informed career choices. It will help us break free from the constraints of social expectations and pursue our ambitions.
Hello, my name is Kelechi Achinono. I'm the Next Gen Fellow for Justice at the United Nations Foundation. As a Nigerian and as a young person, I look forward to a better world by 2030, where everyone has access to good and quality healthcare, good and quality education, good infrastructure, clean energy, and most of all, access to justice, irrespective of their financial or social standing. A world where it is obvious that the government listens to its people. A world where it is obvious that the people are at the forefront and center of decision-making, policy-making, laws and regulations being passed. A world where the marginalized, the vulnerable, and young people in society feel seen, heard, respected, and listened to. I want to urge the leaders of my country, Nigeria, to work alongside other nations to make this a possibility. I want to urge them to invest in the future of our people, our planet, and our prosperity. I want to urge them to lead by example in compassion, integrity, and accountability, ensuring that even our future generations will thank us for a better world that they have been born into. I want to urge the leaders of my country to make this a reality. Thank you.
Now that we have had a chance to see what your challenge might look like and how it might come together, please do also remember that you can submit in writing if you are more comfortable in that format. And everyone who submits will have the chance to be featured in the broader SDG Summit campaign that we will be putting together, with a handful being selected as champions of this campaign. Submissions for this challenge will close July 31, and so please use the link that has been placed in the chat to get all the additional information, see how you could submit your challenge to world leaders. Now, as we look to develop our visions for this future, I will now hand to Hashani to give us further insight into the shape that this future will take.
Thanks so much, Taylor. It's such a great opportunity to speak to all of you. My name is Hashani Damadasa. I'm a senior director at the UN Foundation and lead the UN Foundation's work on our future agenda, which is a focus on young people and future generations. So today we are focusing on why the SDG Summit in September. Why is it such a big deal that world leaders are making commitments around the SDGs? And why do the SDGs matter more than they've ever mattered before? Well, we're going to actually go back a little bit in time so we can look forward in time. And you might have heard announcements on the news recently that we hit a huge number. We hit 8 billion people around the world just recently, which is a pretty big feat. What the news doesn't tell you, though, is that almost half of those people are actually young people like you that are under 30. So that's around 4 billion. And what the news also doesn't tell you is there are more young people living today than there ever will be in 2040, 2050, 2060. This is the greatest amount of young people that there ever will be. But it's also important to remember when we take a look at this infographic, which is really mapping out our journey from 1975 to today in 2024, that you can see the curves and the lines interweave. This is the growth of countries over this period of time. And we haven't all grown in the same way. If you take a look at Germany, we've only really seen a small increase of about 6% since 1975, while big countries like Pakistan and Nigeria have almost quadrupled in size during that time. Plus, there were only 6 countries in 1975 with populations over 100 million, but now there are 15. So it's clear our world is just moving so much faster in such a rapid pace than ever before. And things get even super interesting when we look at the top 20 most populous countries now. This year, we've experienced a massive shift with India becoming the world's biggest country, a claim that is its first in history. Another big shift has been the rise of Africa. Looking back 50 years ago, Nigeria was the only African nation in the top 20, but today it's joined by Ethiopia, Egypt, the Democratic Republic of Congo, all of which are young countries with the world's largest share of young people. When we mean young countries, we mean they have the most young people in their population. Africa alone is home to 10 of the youngest countries in the world. But this is a really different story in Europe, where it's the flip side of this equation. Back in 1973, there were only 6 European countries on the top list. Germany once was one of the world's largest populations, has dropped all the way down to the 19th position. These demographics and trends tell us that we are changing over time, but it's not just about the numbers. It's about the trajectory, it's about the direction we're going in the future, and that our future is driven by young people. And it's important when we're thinking about the SDGs that we make investments in young people wherever they are, but especially in young countries. So let's take a look at the next slide when we look at these trends and see what happens in the future. Well, our 8 billion is going to turn to 10.3 billion in 2100. And wow, the future is looking super crowded. The UN predicts we'll reach 10.3 billion, as I said, and most of that is in Asia and Africa, about 90% in Asia and Africa. And we're already experiencing some massive shifts with, as I mentioned, India being our biggest country. We'll see Nigeria's young population almost double its size by 2100. Meanwhile, China will decrease its size, with aging countries like Japan and Italy almost shrinking by 40% in 2100. With so many people clustered in the same region or country, really strategic planning and investments through the SDGs now in young people, especially in young countries, are important not just for 2024, not just important for 2030, they're important for our future. And during this time, Nigeria will experience one of the biggest demographic booms driven by its young people, almost doubling its size now, between now and 2100. And you'll see there are a number of countries like DRC and Ethiopia also experiencing this same massive shift. But before we get into the impacts into young people, and specifically a couple of countries, I want to leave you with a couple of takeaways between our world in the future and where we were 50 years ago. In 1975, there was so much more space to grow and to predict changes, to make shifts in a stable way. But you see now on this slide, look how much our world is changing in such a short period of time. Our growth is just going in turbo speed. And there are many more people clustered in the same region or country. For example, Nigeria is dealing with a land area 11 times smaller than the US, but it has more than double the population by 2100. So overall, our world is already starting to look very different from the time the SDGs were first created in 2015. And that change is only going to get much more dramatic by 2030 when the SDGs come to an end and the real shifts start taking place in 2050 and to 2080. So when we think about investing in the SDGs now, we need to think about sustaining the impact of those investments to tackle some of these future trends all the way up to our world in 2050, 2080, 2100. Why? So we don't lose all the impact of our hard efforts and wins in education, gender equality, climate action, and much more. This is especially true for countries with high proportions of young people. Let's take a quick sneak peek into some of these countries around the world. Next slide, please. So you can take, in this map, you'll see in blue a couple of the biggest young countries. These are young countries with that have a high degree of young people under the age of 30. Anywhere between 65 to 75% of young people. And you can see they're mostly concentrated in Africa. We will also see what's happening with these demographic trends, that there are also large portions of the world that are aging. Most of that, as I mentioned before, are in Europe, and those countries are in green, anywhere between 20 to 30%. So what does this all mean? Well, it's clear that both these sets of countries, whether they're young or aging, are experiencing similar challenges in different ways. So countries with high numbers of young people are better able to drive creativity, drive innovation, drive economic growth, and are able and better positioned to tackle some of our biggest challenges, both now and in the future. We're already seeing that happen in young innovators in Ghana, Kenya, and Bangladesh that are harnessing the power of technology to unlock greater access to education and pioneering solutions to combat climate change. But a lot of these countries are also struggling with this rapid pace of change to find jobs in time for their young people, to give young people and children the education opportunities that they so desperately need, to provide the resources, safety, and services so that are vital for their early growth and development, because poverty, inequality, and instability are real threats. And meanwhile, let's take a look at some of those richer countries which are aging really fast. One of the world's oldest country is Japan, where 28% of the population is older than 65. The rest of the oldest countries in the top 10 are all in Europe, with the oldest European country being Italy. By 2100, countries like Japan and Italy are expected to see a 40% decrease in population size, with most people being over the age of 65. This demographic shift will lead to likely school and university closures, making it challenging for economies and businesses to find skilled workers. It also means a huge demand for long-term care and pensions, which are very expensive and do put pressure on public services and budgets, which young people will be shouldering much of this burden. So we know that, yes, the future is hard to predict and data can change, but this data and trends are what we have now, and it's becoming much more clear. But one thing that will remain the clearest of all is that young people will be in high demand everywhere. That's not going to change. Young people can refresh the workforce, they can increase tax revenue, they can spark innovation, and they can improve cooperation between countries, especially young countries and aging countries. Your cultural diversity can help build more tolerant and inclusive societies. However, we have to start investing in young people if we want all of these things to happen. And that means investing in the SDGs, like education, like climate change, like inequality. And these investments must first start in young countries. And the youngest countries by 2100, all of them will be in Africa, with Niger the youngest of them all. It's hard to believe that over half of the population in Niger today is under 15. But Niger is a perfect example of why we need to invest in our youngest if we want to invest in our future. And this all starts with the 2030 agenda. It's not just our roadmap for the present, it's our roadmap for the future. And it's why September is such an important moment when world leaders will be gathering to make ambitious commitments for 2030 that will impact our future for decades to come. So the imperative, why we have to act and how we can act. Next slide, please. So we must act for the future. As I mentioned, the 2030 agenda is a clearest roadmap where we need to push on urgent areas that impact young people, especially young countries. And there are some big threats that our world is facing. And we've tried to encapsulate some of these threats or challenges across the 5 principles that underpin the 2030 agenda. These principles are people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. And these principles actually bring together a cluster of SDGs that you see below. We've already spoken about the pressures of these trends on people, with most of our future in Asia and Africa. We haven't spoken about a couple of the others, but I'm going to whip through them really quickly. We already know that 2 in 3 young people live in countries at high risk of climate change, with some of these regions in Asia and Africa losing 50% of their wildlife and nearly all their coral reefs by 2100. We also know that young people are twice as likely and 3 times more likely to live in extreme poverty and be jobless than adults. We also know that injustice, conflict, and violence significantly derail the SDGs and extend inequality. Young countries especially lose 1.7 trillion, that's a lot of zeros, attributed to conflict And we also know that partnerships are so vital, especially for young countries that have to prioritize paying their debt 5 times more than they can on the SDGs. And this debt is just growing 60 times faster than they can actually pay it off. So these are the biggest challenges for the SDGs because they impact young people and their future the most. So how can we act? How can we move? Where is the imperative? Next slide, if you could. So we've identified a couple of areas with many of you on the call. The first is we need to really work with and for young people. This means activating young people to accelerate the SDGs in their community and to make sure that their priorities are heard in the highest rooms of influence. We also need to build a more resilient, future-proof world that can withstand some of these challenges. We also need to unleash the power of intergenerational leadership, action, and dialogue, because no demographic, including young people, can do this alone. And when we work together across generations, especially within the UN, we can just get there so much faster. And we need to start now thinking for the future with long-term planning. And we don't need to wait for the future to act now for the future. And there are a couple of actions that we can do this now. We'll start mobilizing with young change makers. We have our engine room, which many of our participants are part of, which is this huge vehicle for movement building. And there are a couple of other ideas here that we want to take forward now, all the way up to the next SDG Summit in 2027. And all of this is in the spirit of international cooperation. Next slide, if you could. So, as you know, we've mentioned the SDG Summit a couple of times. You might have also heard that there's the Summit of the Future in 2024, and that much of the UN is talking about these two summits as twin summits, that what is happening now at the SDG Summit is an extension of what will be at the Summit of the Future, where we'll be talking about the SDGs, but also the entirety of the international system. And we have to keep the focus on the most vital areas for progress for young people and their future. So follow us on this journey throughout this year, into September and into next September, which will be the Summit of the Future. If you could, the next slide. And if we're looking into the future, there are a couple of key events that we want to keep you aware of. So you know why you're staying part of this race. It is a long race, whether it is to 2030 or beyond, but there are a couple of big moments in the next year or two that are important as we mobilize for the SDGs and beyond. Across the next few slides, as my colleagues flip, you'll see some of these on the slides. We have COP28 in November. We have big financing for development event or summit in April next year. There's also the G20 summit in Brazil also next year. And then there are a couple of others. There's the World Social Summit. There's the next G20 summit in South Africa. And there's the COP30 in Brazil. We mention those countries because there are also countries with huge demographics and huge influence for change. There are also finally a couple of final events in the next slide that we should keep our eye on. There's the just newly announced a new global financial pact, which is a follow-up meeting to the Paris meeting that just happened. And there's, of course, the last SDG Summit in 2027. So this summit is a moment we have to make sure that there are some really strong wins for young people and young countries. And that means we have to first think, plan, and act for the future. And over the course of the next year and a half or so, we'll be working very closely with young people on this call, but young people across the Unlock the Future Coalition on how we think for the SDGs, how we push for the SDGs, but also how we think beyond the SDGs. Well, thank you so much. That was, I know, a lot of information, but I wanted to give you a perspective on the data and where our world is moving and why the 2023 SDG Summit is so important. I'm going to hand over to before I hand over to my colleague, Taylor, I invite all of you to take a moment and reflect on what your vision for 2030 is. What does a better future look like to you? If you have an idea, if you have a proposal, we want to hear it. Please add one sentence to the chat that really encapsulates what the future looks like to you. And by the end of the meeting, we'll have a digital painting of our collective vision for the future, which is made only possible by the powers of artificial intelligence, which I know our next speakers will be able to shed light on as we dive into the Global Digital Compact and the Summit of the Future. Taylor, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashani. And I can tell you, having watched the chat while you were speaking, that everyone is clamoring to know where your research came from. So I think you can rest assured that you had everyone on the edge of their seat with what that shape of the future looks like. It is now my absolute pleasure to introduce Her Excellency Ambassador Anna-Karin Ennerstrom, who is the permanent representative of Sweden to the United Nations, and His Excellency Ambassador Claver Gatete, who is the permanent representative of the Republic of Rwanda to the United Nations. Now, Ambassador Ennerstrom is a Swedish diplomat with extensive experience from several top positions worldwide. She has served as the representative to the Political and Security Committee at the Permanent Representation of Sweden to the European Union in Brussels. She was Special Envoy to Afghanistan and Pakistan, and the Swedish Ambassador to Pakistan and Afghanistan. Ambassador Gatete, before he was appointed as the permanent representative in February 2022, served as the Minister of Infrastructure from 2018, before which he was the Minister of Finance and Economic Planning, and he also served as the Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda and Deputy Governor. So you can see we have an incredibly rich wealth of knowledge from these two incredible leaders. And together, Ambassador Ennerstrom and Ambassador Gatete serve as the co-facilitators of the Global Digital Compact in the UN General Assembly. The Global Digital Compact is expected to outline shared principles for an open, free, and secure digital future for all to be agreed at the Summit of the Future. We will also be having participants engage actively in this session, so I encourage you to listen closely to what these incredible leaders will be sharing. And I would like to now hand to the ambassadors to provide us with an introduction to their work and their ambitions for the Summit of the Future.
I'm looking at Claver, but maybe I can just start. Thank you so much for having us with you, and we're very interested, of course, to listen to your views. Just a few words on where we are in this process. And so Ambassador Gatete and myself, we were appointed as co-facilitator already last fall, and we have during the spring now have a number of consultations with member states, with civil society, with youth, with the private sector. Especially, they have been centered around 8 themes, what we have called the deep dives, which have been hybrid meetings with between 500 to 800 people participating. Maybe some of you have also participated, and they've been really educational for us, but also given us a very broad perspective on the digital agenda. And as you know, and as is very important for us, is that this is and needs to be a truly multi-stakeholder process, where we need to involve all those that are concerned with the digitalization, which is everyone actually, but civil society, young people, private sector, and academia. So just very briefly go through the themes, which have been then digital inclusion and connectivity, internet governance, data protection, human rights online, digital trust and security, artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies, global digital commons, and accelerating progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, since we are in the HLPF, the importance of the digital tools to accelerate the implementation of the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs cannot be enough emphasized. So this is really where our agenda is playing in to the SDG Summit in September. We will, of course, our process will continue until the Summit of the Future in September 2024. And we will, during next spring, negotiate a global digital compact, which is key, of course, for the United Nations, not least when it comes to the implementation of the SDGs. I will hand over to my colleague, Ambassador Gatete, and unfortunately, I will have to leave at 9:45. But we're very interested to, of course, to hear your views on this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you very much to hear from the young people. You know that we have been learning from the young people from the time we started the deep dives. What is very clear today is that technology is the way to go in everything that we do, whether it comes to development or the social development or the day-to-day work. Nothing is done without the technology. And that's why it is very, very important that we really, this time for the Summit of the Future, one of the key elements that we focus on is the Global Digital Compact. And this is so useful given the experience that we've had in Rwanda, where if you want to progress in development, in agriculture, in industry, there has to be technology. Technology is now the key enabler of education. You cannot conduct a universal health system without technology. Basically, you can't do anything in your offices, running a government, running a company, or doing anything without technology. Even the young people know it better, that now if they don't have any digital platforms, there's no job for them. They can't communicate, they can't link with each other, they can't do anything without technology. We have to accept it's the way of the future. We discussed this for a long time during the World Economic Forum. Even the development of Internet of Things, it is giving us signals that the future is only technology. But technology has all the good things. It also has some side effects. And that's why we need to really have a good understanding of this and address the issues that are related to technology. As we discussed today, there are more than 2 billion people who are not connected. So they don't even know what we are talking about in terms of technology, how it can be improved, how it can be accessed. They don't have it. So how do we make sure that everybody gets it? How do we reduce that kind of digital divide? Even for those people who have it, there are also issues that are going on online. There is misinformation, there is disinformation, there is abuse of some kind. There is quite a lot of things that needs to be handled. We also have to make sure that the data which is online is protected, because people can use it for different ways. And when it comes to the artificial intelligence, it is actually showing us that we can make progress, but there is also the bad side of it, which we need to take care of. So we have to look at it holistically and see how it contributes mainly to development, to how it can accelerate the SDGs, and also how it can improve our social life, our way of life, how we deal with each other, how we link with each other, how we do things in a day-to-day basis. And that's why it is very important for the whole world to get together, to think deeply about it, and make sure that we can put some preventive measures for any kind of side effects, for any bad things that may happen with technology. That's why we are here to discuss about technology, to negotiate, and make sure that we come up with a compact, as my colleague has just mentioned. In Rwanda, you have benefited so much. And we know that it's not just talking about it. You need infrastructure. In the case of Rwanda, we had the broadband infrastructure installed across the whole country. And with that one, we had a 4G and covering the whole country by over 95%. This has been very, very useful, because once you have the infrastructure, the broadband infrastructure, and you have the satellite, you can cover the urban, the rural, the semi-urban, everywhere. And that way, then it can be used in schools, in health centers, it can be used for anything. That requires investment, heavy investment, which some of our poor countries do not have. What do we do about that? So that's where we need some kind of cooperation to make sure that everybody is connected, everybody is on board, so that we are speaking the same language, so that we deal with the issues together. But now it is those that have it that are talking about the issues, and there are those that don't have anything, that have nothing to say, and they are lagging behind. And the longer it continues, the bigger the gap in terms of inequality. And that's why we are coming together at the United Nations, so that we can address those kind of issues which we see. And we count on young people who really now understand. Let me tell you that my children use it more than me. And in most cases, I have to listen to them to teach me what I don't know. So it did not come during our time when you are young, it came when you are old. So here you cannot blame us, but we must find, we understand the challenges that you are facing. We understand that you are the future. We understand that if we don't take action now, we cannot leave it for you because it will be too late. And that's why we needed your involvement. That's why we appreciated your contribution during the deep dives. And now we are counting on you as we move forward to make sure that the compact that will come out will be implemented by you and by others. I don't have much to say because most have been said by my colleague. We're just waiting to hear from you if you have any questions before we go to other meetings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ambassadors, for that incredibly insightful overview. What I will do, number one, is encourage all of our participants to add your questions, comments into the chat, because we will have our wonderful Kelechi, our next generation fellow, reviewing that, and she'll get to share a bit of what she's seeing in the chat with the ambassadors before they need to leave. But we're also going to launch a quick poll, because I know the ambassadors are very keen to hear what young people are thinking. They've already done this a lot in their dialogues, but we're keen to continue giving them insight as to what is at the forefront of the minds of young people. So the question we will be asking you in this poll is, which of the following is the challenge that you think needs the greatest attention? Which is the challenge that you think we should be focusing on the most? And I will weave the answers to that into our conversation as we go. But while our participants are filling out that poll, I'd love to pose a similar question to the ambassadors, which is, what do you see as the greatest challenges presented by digital technologies as we work towards the SDGs? Ambassador Ennerstrom, I'd love to start with you.
Sorry, there were some problems with the technology. Thank you so much, and great to have this poll as well. That's very helpful for us. I think, as my colleague Ambassador Gatete said, I mean, the connectivity and the importance that everyone can be connected. I think that's a major challenge, and that's a major drive behind the Global Digital Compact as well. People cannot take part of the development unless, as Ambassador Gatete, and I think Rwanda is a really good example of this. There are other countries as well, but I think Rwanda is a very good example on how you use the technology to drive the development. And I don't think it's not only a matter of access to the internet. It's a matter of affordability. It's a matter of digital skills. It's a matter of education. So it's so much more than only looking at a technical way of having people connected. And as we see, there is a huge difference between someone in Europe and a poor woman in one of the poorest countries. So this is really the challenge that I think we need to work on.
Ambassador Ennerstrom, I have to say, it sounds like the dialogues you've done so far have been incredibly accurate, because what you've just reflected is entirely in alignment of what's coming through the poll. At the moment, we provided about 5 options for biggest concerns, and what's come through is access and education around digital literacy and digital technology. Ambassador Gatete, I'd love to pass to you, because most of the young people that we work with are digital natives already, and are impacted by the negativity of the digital divide. What opportunities do you see for achieving a more sustainable digital future, and what is practically required for us to bring this to life?
Well, Thank you very much. I believe, number one, there are a few things that needs to be in place, and one of them is connectivity. If you don't have the connectivity, then it's going to become very difficult, even as we talk. Once you have the connectivity, as we talked, you just mentioned, and as my colleague mentioned, there has to be massive training. In my country, we use the 3 official languages: English, French, and Kinyarwanda. Kinyarwanda is our local language. So the training takes place mainly in Kinyarwanda, but also in English. And that way, then we bring everybody on board. The reason for that is that with technology, you have to do so many things. For the financial inclusion, where we are now at 93%, the whole entire transactions, which is in Rwanda, is done online. In most cases, of course, mobile money. You find that if you don't have that knowledge, it becomes very difficult. If you are a farmer and you don't have a smartphone and you cannot really be able to participate in terms of purchasing fertilizers, seeds, in terms of making sure that you do the payments online, it becomes very difficult. In transport system now, you use, they call it tap and go. You cannot use, there is no cash like transaction that you see. If you don't have that kind of training, it becomes very difficult. We have also offered a gateway where all the basic services that ordinary people need on a day-to-day basis in your local communities is done online. If you don't have those kind of, if you don't have the facilities and you don't have the skills, then it becomes very difficult for you to participate and benefit from this. Education is now being conducted online. So if you don't, that's why we are saying, and which is very true, is that training is very, very important to make sure that as you put the infrastructure in place, as you connect the people, then they have the skills to be able to participate and gain from that. So it's very, very important that we have really the training continuously, not training once or twice, it's continuous training. Because now working with government, we are interconnected in such a way that if you don't have those kind of skills, you cannot really participate in how to run the government. Even from here, we are connected with our own government. So that's why it is very, very important that we're all connected. In the health system, the same thing. They do the telemedicine, but at the same time, if you are going to a hospital, you can go anywhere else, but all the information is online, meaning that actually, if you're not connected, how do you participate? How do you get the services? And everywhere now, it's technology. So that's why I'm saying continuous training never ends, because there are always more people who need more, either to upscale, or they want to make sure that they are learning even from the basics. So that's all I can say for now. But the biggest challenge that we see also that we cannot really avoid is the artificial intelligence. It's moving so fast. And for all people like us who are moving slowly, it becomes even faster. So by the time we finish the Global Digital Compact, I don't know how much will have changed, because now we are seeing even competing companies which are saying, no, we can even develop a better one. Another one saying we have a better one. So they are really on marathon in terms of what can be done using the artificial intelligence, that it is moving so fast. And that's why we need to conclude this and then monitor what is going to happen with the artificial intelligence as we move forward, and what we need to do as the people who really want to make sure that it benefits everyone.
Thank you, Ambassador Gatete, and you're definitely walking in lockstep with the participants on this call, with 43% saying that education is what they need to be part of the future of technology. And so the application of that to education, politics, and health, also essential to being part of that positive future. Now, I will thank both Ambassador Gatete and Ambassador Enostrom. We are about to hand to Kelechi, who will summarize some of the insights of the young people who participated in this call, but I'm aware you'll have to start getting ready for your next engagement. So thank you so much for your time. I know all the participants are incredibly grateful to have leaders of your caliber share your time and share your insights. But thank you for your time. And Kelechi, who is one of our wonderful Next Generation Fellows focusing on peace and justice, will now amplify some of the voices of the young people and young leaders on this call. Kelechi, over to you.
All right, thank you very much. This has been an interesting conversation, and why I think that with everything, just to quickly amplify what's been said so far, it's just that we understand that, you know, digital literacy and education is something that we need, but I think that the concern that we have is how are the young people really involved? So as much as there's been some level of consultation, we want to be sure that we are not left out, even in the implementation as well. And with respect to lack of access to internet, and we want it to be that, you know, young people are really at the core of what's being decided and how it's being implemented. So again and again, it's just been conversations around access to internet, for digital literacy as well. But we want to be at the core of the implementation of digital compact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelechi. And now we are going to continue the intergenerational nature of this conversation. And our final thanks to Ambassador Gatete and Ambassador Enastrom. I hope that the rest of your engagements today go well. We are about to hand over to some more incredible young leaders that we have within the engine room. And it is my absolute pleasure to start with Kushi Jain, who is one of our wonderful young leaders in the Financing Action Group, who is here to share her challenge for world leaders. So once again, giving you a taste of what your submission to the Engine Room Challenge could look like. Over to you, Kushi.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And I would like to begin with extending my heartfelt gratitude to the organizers of the Engine Room for this incredible opportunity, and to each young leader for being an integral part of the Engine Room community, always showing an unwavering commitment to foster positive change in our world. The world faces many complex challenges that demand urgent action. However, amid these challenges, I see boundless opportunities for transformation and growth. We live in a world with the largest generation of young people in its history. These young minds, including each of us, represent an untapped superpower that can turbo-change progress toward the SDGs. They require investment not only in their education, but also in the resources they need to turn their visions into reality. Recognizing the significance of our collective efforts, I envision a world in 2030 that is vibrant, equitable, and sustainable, where every individual should have the chance to thrive and contribute. To make this vision a reality, I propose a challenge to our world leaders, that is, embrace collaboration and empathy, uniting to create a world that leaves no one behind. I was inspired by reading the case of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization's Youth Empowerment Program in Uganda, which has mentored and fostered over 2,500 youth-led enterprises, creating over 10,000 jobs and driving economic growth in the country. We need to amplify such actions to provide financial resources to young change makers. Youth possess the drive, creativity, and innovative thinking to tackle complex problems. However, without funding and resources, their ideas remain unrealized. So I implore our leaders to establish support systems like grants, fellowships, investment programs to nurture the next generation of our change agents. Finally, the power to create meaningful change lies within each of us. It's our duty to hold our world leaders accountable and demand action. Together, I truly believe we can create a world in 2030 where compassion, innovation, and sustainable development thrive. So the Engine Room Challenge beckons us to share our visions, challenge our leaders, and shape a brighter future. Thank you again, all of you, for your dedication. But let's continue to make our voice heard and seize these opportunities ahead. Together, we can build a world that truly leaves no one behind. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kushi, for that. And both you and so many of the other young leaders that we have the privilege of working with in the Engine Room are a testament to that untapped superpower that you've mentioned. Next up, we're going to go to Kalori Wastonga, who is from our Gender Equality Action Group, to share his challenge for world leaders.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And I want to thank the entire Engine Room team for making this happen. So, good day, distinguished guests and fellow young leaders. My name is Kalori Wasonga from Nairobi, Kenya. I stand before you today as a project lead for Project Forge, an initiative dedicated to spurring gender equality in the global south. Allow me to share my personal story, featuring why I chose gender equality as my life's purpose. So 2 years ago, while I was working at a small nonprofit in Nairobi, in the slum, we received a young mother who was barely a teenager at the time, and she was bravely raising 2 children. And tragically, all these 3 children that she had were being abused by their father. So witnessing the plight of this vulnerable family, this fueled my determination to address gender inequalities head on. This experience also made me realize that our homes are no longer safe. So this also consequently means that our children are no longer safe from harm. And this is because our children are vulnerable in their own homes, then no one is truly safe. Not even the generations of the future is safe because our children are our future. And therefore, this made me realize that to achieve gender equality, the transformation must commence within our homes, radiating outwards towards society. And this brings me to my vision for 2030. So my vision for 2030 is a world where gender equality is not merely aspirational, but also tangible. In this future, we have dismantled the barriers that hold women and young girls back, and we've created a society where every individual is able to achieve their full potential, regardless of their gender. So towards this end, I make this challenge to world leaders. I would love if we do the following. One is investing in education, and this should be both formal and informal, because with informal education, we can shift the barriers that prevent us from accessing or believing in certain things, like our perspectives on life and why we generally tend towards abusing young girls and women. These perspectives can shift if we invest in informal education. And formal education can allow us to uplift young girls and women, to empower them to basically find a way of making a means to provide themselves with income through employment or through innovation. Secondly, I'd love if our leaders could also invest in economic empowerment through policy and research. We need policies and initiatives that promote economic empowerment for women, including access to financial resources and representation in leadership. By closing the gender pay gap, we'll unleash the full potential of women, contributing to sustainable development in the global south. And thirdly, I'd love if our leaders would end gender-based violence through legal reforms. Ending gender-based violence is paramount to achieving gender equality, and we must strengthen the legal frameworks that we currently have to support survivors and promote comprehensive sexuality education. And in my closing thoughts, in conclusion, I'd love if all of us work together to create a future where gender equality is not just aspirational, but a lived reality. I invite each and every one of us to join hands with the initiatives that we have in this program, Project Forge, to embrace innovation and champion policies that advance gender equality. Together, let us leave no one behind and build a world that is fair, just, and inclusive for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kalori. And I think it is the ambition and hope that brings us all here, which is taking the 2030 agenda from aspiration to reality. So thank you for speaking to that so wonderfully. Lucky last and one of our youngest but most active members of the engine room, it is my pleasure to introduce Tavisha Reddy Tadiki, who is from our Future Generations Action Group. Take it away, Tavisha.
Thank you so much. Our future is artificial intelligence. But I'm not talking about robots taking over our planet and decimating the human race. I'm talking about a world where machines help perform surgeries, improve healthcare, assist students and teachers in the classroom, and even act as a personal to the common person. In 2023, we are witnessing the beginning of an AI revolution that is driven by remarkable progress in language learning models. AI is experiencing exponential growth across all fields: healthcare, finance, retail, art, and music, just to name a few. This powerful tool will soon be used all over the world, regardless of what country you reside in. Whether you are in the Northern Hemisphere or the Southern, AI will impact your role. And while we may not have to be worried about robots decimating the planet, This powerful technology comes with its own set of problems. AI requires a huge amount of data input, power, and energy. This amount of energy causes the system to heat up, and then we have to use a lot more energy to cool it back down again, which impacts our climate and environment. As we are in the beginning of the technological shift, we must take initiative to devise practical and innovative solutions to create energy-efficient technology. As we plan for the future, we also need to tackle our already existing problems. I strongly feel that we must not wait for a billion-dollar plan to solve these problems. Instead, we must focus on implementing simple, repeatable solutions starting at a grassroots level. In my own community, I have made it my mission to advocate for the banning of styrofoam. I am working on educating my peers and conducting foresight workshops for decision makers to learn about the negative impact of this harmful material. Small actions, multiplied globally, can become the key to solving these problems. Leaders, your commitment is vital. I urge you to support and invest in research and development initiatives that drive energy-efficient AI systems, promote renewable energy sources, and foster eco-friendly practices in the fields of technology. More importantly, we need to support the efforts of young leaders and changemakers to make a movement in their local communities to improve sustainability. These collective movements, initiated by leaders working with the community to take decisive action, will help strike a balance between AI advancements and sustainability. Remember, the best solutions are always the most simple. So no matter how old you are, where you're from, or what you see the future as, your contribution is essential. And together, we can ensure that the generations after us have the chance to see a sustainable and technologically advanced society. Thank you.
That is certainly a thank you to you, Tavisha, not to us, because I think exactly what you're saying, this small actions amplified globally, that's exactly what this engine room is all about. Young people around the world coming together to do their bit to get us that bit closer to accelerating the 2030 agenda. And I must say, I am incredibly blown away with the amount of insights and inspiration that we have already covered on this call, but we are an hour in, and so we want to invigorate all of our incredible participants and inject some spirit into our time together, and there is no one better to do that than the incredible Miss Yankee, who is a British Ghanaian writer, activist, and spoken word artist who has been captivating audiences from London, Paris, New York to Melbourne, and is a 6-time slam champion. Miss Yankee made her television debut at the BAFTA award-winning Life and Rhymes and has completed solo performances at theatres around the world, including Field Day, Edinburgh Fringe Festival, Tramlines, among many, many other incredible spotlights. And with that, I will pass to Miss Yankee to take it from here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'd anticipated that I would be inspired, but just even reading the chat before we get to the young people that have spoken, I'm going to be leaving today inspired to write more. So I'm going to share a piece with you that's titled The New Norm. And yeah, I hope you guys like it. I commit to taking risks. I commit to make mistakes. I commit to learn from them. I commit to innovate. I commit to find my purpose. I commit to pave the way. I commit to new ideas. I commit to make a change. This is the new norm. Innovation. I'm talking groundbreaking, world-shaping, life-changing innovation. What does it take? I wonder if some of you are wondering what the hell a poet is doing on this stage. I mean, how could a bunch of words affect any kind of change? Some of the greatest minds of all time were inspired by poetry and the arts. Tesla, for a start. I wonder how many people know that one of his greatest inventions was inspired by the words of a poet. Great minds are nourished by diverse influences. Great minds break ground by thinking big and taking risks. Great minds are proficient in the art of failing, which is ironic because failure remains one of people's biggest fears. But I'm here to tell you that maybe your failures aren't big enough. Elon Musk literally failed his way to success, and he's not the only one. Einstein, Darwin, Bill Gates, Oprah, Steve Jobs, Zuckerberg, Jay-Z, I could go on. Some of you may already know this, but despite their many failures, they managed to stay focused. They kept striving. So knowing this, why is it that so many are content with just surviving? Actually, whilst I'm asking questions, I want to know why. Why are so many happy to turn a blind eye? Our children are living in a time where time is of the essence. Aside from the fact that our planet is dying and the world appears to be falling apart at the seams, it seems that the minds of our children are being run like machines. Flooded with dopamine, addicted to screens, minds are polluted like the air that we breathe. Our children are living with our decisions. Just look at the legacy that they have been given. Stuck in a system which no longer serves them, we sit in boardrooms whilst they're bored in classrooms with no room for new norms. How can we stand by and watch the futures of children slide? Child poverty is on the rise, and it isn't just something you see on TV. Children need us to make changes. So if you know a simple change is in your reach, then make it. Take a risk, find solutions, stop ignoring truths, and while you're at it, stop contributing to pollution. It is killing us, literally. So if you can use less plastic by investing in alternatives, then do it. And if you are focused purely on profit, then you really need to stop it. Besides, if you innovate with purpose, you will watch your profits rocket. It's symbiotic. Some of you are so plugged into this cycle of wealth that you cannot spare any change, let alone spark it. Billions are made in profits between the world's leading markets, but who is taking the lead in world-changing ways? And maybe it's easy for me to say, but I'm serious. Why aren't people planning for a future they know will soon be here? Why talk about survival but reject the gift of fear? There are lessons in your losses and gains that come from pain. Sometimes you have to lose it all and rebuild in the rain. Sometimes you have to watch the crowd and walk a different way. Sometimes you have to think about how you can pave the way. Adapt, create, and change to solve the problems that you face. People will say you're crazy when you're the first to switch your lane. But when you reach your destination, they will celebrate your name. Take a risk, because your comfort zone really is one of the most dangerous places to exist. Stability, it has its place, but does not guarantee fulfillment. Living in your comfort zone may offer you security, but it will kill your creativity and hold you back from brilliance. Take a risk. It doesn't even need to be big. Small steps soon lead to large strides. This mantra has changed my life. I was once rock bottom, but I refused to lose my mind. I kept it moving on a steady incline. I learned that small steps can change a whole life, inspire a whole mind, turn a whole tide. A small change can spark a whole chain of imagination, bright ideas and innovation. So what are you waiting for? Make change. Start small, think big, find purpose, take risks. Simple, right? So what are you waiting for? Are you willing to make a commitment to yourself? And that wasn't a rhetorical question. I would like to hear your answer. So I will ask again, are you willing to make a commitment to yourself? Great. So now here comes the interactive bit. I can see that many of you are committing to make that commitment in the chat. I'm going to invite you all to help me close this poem with the same affirmations that we started with. So I have written in the chat the affirmations that I would like us to all say together, and here's how it's going to work. I'm gonna read these affirmations to you, and I'm going to ask you to read them back with as much passion and as much commitment as possible. Now, usually I'm with people in person, so I don't have the luxury of being able to hear you all loud and clear. But I really would like you to lean into the power of affirmations. And for each affirmation that I say out loud, I would like to close today with you reading them back to me. So here we go. I commit to taking risks. I commit to make mistakes. I commit to learn from them. I commit to innovate. I commit to find my purpose. I commit to pave the way. I commit to new ideas. I commit to make a change. This is the new norm. Thank you very much for having me, everybody. Thank you very much.
I just feel the need to pause. I can't quite jump in immediately and fill that space after you. It is no surprise that you have won 7 slam poetry competitions, because that, I think, I'm watching the chat as well now, it roused something in, I think, all of our spirits, which really allows us to believe that we can make this impact. And I love that you made it interactive as well. So the most heartfelt thank you to you. And I am sure that the ripple effects of the inspiration you've just shared with everyone on this call will go on for far longer than this call. So thank you so much, Ms. Yankee, for that incredible piece. You can see, I hope you're watching the chat to see how appreciated you are. And with that, I am excited that we can take this inspiration, this energy into our next session, which for those of you who thoroughly enjoyed her presentation earlier today and are wanting more of Hashani, you are very lucky that you are about to get a large dose of it. She will be leading our next session on a transformational agenda for hope from 2030 to 2100. And with that, I will pass to you, Hashani.
Thank you so much, Taylor. And I also want to thank all the young speakers and Ms. Yankee for what was an incredible and inspiring session since the last time I spoke. So just before we get into our fireside chat with 2 great, amazing leaders, we just want to do a bit of a pulse check. You've heard why the SDGs are so important. You've heard why young people and your future are so important in investing in the SDGs. So we just want to take a bit of a beat, and we will have a global poll that will just go out now to really just check how you feel about the 2030 agenda. And just tell us how you feel about progress. Do you feel it's possible? Are you disappointed? Are you unsure? Are you unhopeful? Are you confident? Are you excited? So we'd love to hear from you about where your head is at. And all these things, all you're feeling, these are all things you could be feeling simultaneously. And as Ms. Yankee shared, those commitments are commitments that you can have simultaneously, as are some of these sentiments. So we're now going to kick back, or at least you're going to kick back, and you're going to hear from 2 amazing leaders. So I want to cue to Fernando, who is an inspiring and passionate Chief of Staff to the President of the General Assembly and Chief Legal Advisor at the UN. While this conversation, Fernando, may not be about football, which I know is one of your most favorite pastimes as an Argentinian, Fernando is a leader in international law and diplomacy with an amazing track record. We also are joined by Saru, who is a 25-year-old Nepalese-American researcher and one of our next generation fellows. She is currently studying an MPA in development practice at Columbia University. She's spent 5 years working with BRAC and governments in Asia and Africa to scale up livelihood programs for women living in extreme poverty. Saru is a true inspiration and a proof that one person can really make a difference in the world. So Fernando, Saru, we want to hear your take. We want to hear your take on how you feel about the 2030 agenda. Are we making progress? And in what areas do we need to make these investments the most, not just for the 2030 agenda, but for the future? We'd love to hear just your first take on that, on the status of the SDGs and where we're looking towards the future. Fernando, can I turn first to you?
Happy to jump in, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for letting me join these discussions and spend the morning with you. It's very inspired. I think that well, the status of where we are with the Agenda 2030 is not good. So I think we we just need to just walk out of our door in any of our countries, and we see that many of the promises that were crafted on the Agenda 2030 are not there yet. But that should not be discouraging. I think that we should embrace that the agenda was always seeking to be a very ambitious document that to a bit as the UN, no? Like to move us forward as humanity. And it has its flaws, as anything that we human beings produce, and definitely we have been in the last 7 years learning a lot of how to try to improve its implementation. I do think, though, something that is concerning for me and many of us working at the UN on this is the fright that we can be losing credibility. And when we see we is like a government's UN, but also all the UN family that works around. Like even any of you who works on sustainability and have projects and proposals on the ground, I can imagine that you feel, or you could be feeling sometimes, this lack of like the engine is going slower, and this lack of push that we had 7 years ago is now missing, and that's a bit of our commitment right now, that to see how we can re-energize the agenda, but the belief that we can actually transform our world. And based on that, I think that I really love listening to the challenges that you as youth leaders are putting forward for our generation and in different fronts. And I think like the basis is the creativity, the innovation, the idea to explore how we can coming together make really a change. It's very hard to come after Miss Yankee, but something that I love about her poem is the idea that small change can inspire huge changes. And I think that should be the core of all of us. I mean, unfortunately, each of us is 1 in 8 billion. So none of us is going to be the person, at least not of my generation, definitely, that is going to make a huge change on the world. But we can leave this planet when the time comes, feeling that we did those little changes. And if the majority of 8 billion people works every day to do those little changes, definitely we will have a huge change around the world. So I think like my assessment is, yes, we are in a difficult moment, but that should not discourage that the power that we have in our little context, in our little life, to really make a huge change if we all work together. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Fernando. And I think there's some really inspiring comments you just shared on even the small stuff is the big stuff, that we can make a difference even in the smallest aspect of our lives and our communities. And I think, Saru, that's a really good opportunity to come to you with your experience at BRAC, where even the smallest moves can have ripple effect in communities. I'd love to turn to you and just hear from you about the future. Where do you think we should be making investments using the SDGs? And are you hopeful for the direction that we're heading in?
Thank you. And I'm feeling hopeful now, honestly, having heard from Miss Yankee, having heard from you three incredible young people who have really just delivered such ambitious messages that are very locally grounded and clear, but also resonate, I think, globally with challenges that young people are facing. These messages are exactly what leaders need to hear and need to be laser focused on. And so as much as you can sort of, write blog posts, op-eds, continue to elevate those ahead of the SDG Summit and Summit of the Future, really, the better off we all will be. What stood out to me especially, exactly this idea that small change, investing in just one person. In my work at BRAC, that's often women in extreme poverty who face some of the greatest vulnerability. Investing in them and their innate potential and unlocking their skills and ability to harness their confidence to generate livelihoods transforms their life, but transforms generations in their own family, in the community. It sets off a chain reaction. And so that is a direct model that can be used for our biggest challenges, such as extreme poverty. I think also the holistic approach that I heard across every single challenge delivered is something that really resonates with me. Kalori identified, gender equality is going to take engaging men and boys. It's going to take investment in education, more fair and equal justice systems. This is especially true in extreme poverty, in all SDGs, I think. By 2030, half of children in extreme poverty will be in fragile state, or sorry, half of children in fragile states will be in extreme poverty. Ms. Yankee mentioned how critical it is that we're condemning a generation of children to extreme poverty. And it'll be such a massive challenge to address poverty and fragility together. So clearly it can't be a conversation of let's address poverty or fragility and climate, or as Tavisha said, let's advance technology or promote conservation. In the youth job space in our group, we talk about how, we can't just provide skills to young people. We can't just provide digital access. We also need to provide mentorship and coaching to enable young people to actually feel included, valued, heard in their communities. And I want to just emphasize, I'm feeling hopeful, but with a caveat that this holistic approach, this investment doesn't just happen. It clearly hasn't just happened on its own for the SDG 2030 agenda. And it needs to be really intentional, because it often does and might cost more than a siloed approach where you're just focusing on one issue. But the cost of not investing in this holistic approach is so much greater. So yeah, I want to encourage us to be collaborative. I really thank Fernando and other leaders for joining today, because I think it's so critical that we have intergenerational buy-in and champions for young people in these spaces. It's a great step towards the kind of intergenerational collaboration that we need. And yeah, so just want to encourage you all in the challenges you've identified, continue delivering those messages and recognize the power you have in identifying those challenges and the small actions you're taking every day to build youth networks around them.
Thank you so much, Saru. And I think what you just shared about the innovators that are making a difference in their local community that can last for generations are just like the innovators that we heard today, Kalori, Kushi, Tavisha. And Fernando, it's rare for you to hear young people with so much passion talking about their solutions on a daily basis, just like those three individuals. For people like Saru and Taylor, this is something that they live and breathe almost every day. And I'm no doubt, Fernando, aside from when you were playing football, that you are also really passionate about diplomacy and international law. I would love to hear from you about advice that you could give to innovators like Kalori, Kushi, Tavisha about their challenges to world leaders. World leaders are coming to September with some pretty big commitments, and we need to deliver on those commitments, at least some progress by 2027, which is the last SDG Summit. What is your advice to those young people about sustaining the race, and how do we push on those commitments, and how do they realize some of the ideas that they've shared? What's your advice to them?
Thank you, Shani. I think that what they're doing is amazing. Like when we speak about leaders, we should not forget that leaders usually are politicians, so they feel the heat, the pressure of their constituency, and so be vocal, don't be ashamed of use your voice to ask for change and demand. Sorry.
I think, Fernando, you're frozen. Oh, you're back.
I'm back. Yes. Yeah, I think there was some the connection at the UN, the Wi-Fi. They're trying to upgrade it, but it's not that great. So, which is good. I mean, it means that everyone is working and connected. But in any case, just as I said, put the heat, keep the heat, use your voice, ask for change, ask for. But also, it's important that when you meet leaders, when you have the chance to speak with them, bring ideas. I think for example, the great thing that I love about today exercise is okay, yeah, we listen to young people, innovators, but they're not just asking for change for the sake of change. They say, well, these are the solutions that we want. This is like Tisha, this idea of connecting the AI and climate change concept that in most of the people is super unrelated, but seeing the problem already and trying to work solutions on how we can tackle those interconnections. I think that is really important. Just use your voice, ask for change, but also be ready to bring your ideas. Most of the time, people is ready to listen. I mean, you will be surprised how much reception there is when this creative idea come forward. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Thank you, Fernando. And that's great advice to many of our innovators to hear directly from you. Suru, I just want to flip back to you because we've talked about the 2030 agenda and the SDGs, and you are so passionate about tackling extreme poverty. But we know that communities that are on the edge dip in and out of extreme poverty and will continue beyond 2030. So as you think about 2100 and as you work with young people next year in a roadmap of how we push for the SDGs and make sure our progress sticks for the future, what are some of your ideas or thinking as we plan and prepare for 2100 with some of the trends and some of the challenges that we could face?
Yeah, I think, so we're discussing how young people really need to be at the center of global policymaking. So I first just want to say I really support continued sort of collaborative agenda building, such as the 2100 agenda, but also across all of the major agendas that the UN is developing right now, such as the new agenda for peace and others, where it's not two tracks. It's not a youth space and a leader space. It's actually integrated and there's always a young person at the table. There's always a young person on the technical working group and in the room. And I think, just in preparation for that process, it's going to require more investment in young people, not only to get them into roles. We know that just 3% of parliamentarians around the world are youth, so we under 30. So we need to get more young people into roles to represent growing youth populations first and foremost. But then also they need to be platformed, and that's sort of a sharing of power by older leaders. Putting them in places where they actually represent their country, not just youth as a sort of bubble, but they represent substance, and exactly as Fernando says, substantive issues that they're working on, and national issues and global issues. It also is going to take training to get youth to build their skills to actually be meaningful members of delegations and those working groups. So investment across the board. One example I can point to from the Our Future Agenda platform is how Next Generation Fellows were tasked by the Secretary General to work in collaboration with older leaders on Our Future Agenda and in partnership. And sort of, I think this is a best practice that can be, again, adopted, but even more integrated, so that a 2100 agenda is not an Our Future Agenda, it's a collective agenda. I also am really pleased, as you mentioned, I think in the SDG political declaration draft, global leaders have committed to recognizing extreme poverty as the greatest global challenge that we're facing. It's so obvious, but it gets lost so often amidst all of the things that we're facing. And so I think I just want to emphasize on a substance note within that, the importance of social inclusion, that we're never going to include everybody and really leave no one behind unless we take into account the diverse holistic needs of young people. And that includes feeling of well-being, feeling of respect and dignity, and being integrated in their community. And that often can only happen in a rural, local context with that person-to-person communication, with a coach, with a mentor who's invested in your success beyond just getting that first job through a boot camp or a skills training. But really looking at the individual beyond, and that can just be a community mentor. So I want to emphasize that as part of a central piece of a 2100 agenda.
Thank you so much, Suru. That was a great list. I feel I should have written some of those ideas down, but luckily you're one of our fellows, so we'll take those ideas forward with you. But in the beginning, Suru, you actually had some great ideas about how the UN can meaningfully engage young people and be accountable for how they do that. So actually, Fernando, I would love to go back to you on this point, and both with your hat on, your UN hat on and your UN hat off. I'd love to hear from you about some ideas of how we can meaningfully engage young people in some of these really big moments, not just the Summit of the Future, but even just beyond any of your experience or recommendations that we can help champion for you or with you. That would be great Great to hear.
Thank you. Let me take my UN hat off, and so I will be more blunt on some of the comments. I do feel like the spaces are opening up. We're in a so much better situation in the international level to be able to have spaces for young people to engage and listen to them. What I really think that we need is when, as I said, like my first comment was act small, act in your everyday life, you're all surrounded. But when we come about the thinking has to be global. Unfortunately, my generation and those who came before me, we are still a generation that thought that, you know, in the national context, in these national bubbles, we could solve our issues, that there were global problems were limited to a handful of things that didn't need necessarily global solutions. That has changed a lot. But I don't think that my generation has managed to change the thinking. When we still struggle to see our common humanity and that we all belong to the same group. We are a family, and I think that young people, because they're being faces the same challenges all across the globe from an early age, including things like climate change or the pandemic, and it's more obvious that for you know, that if we want to be able to be ready to transform in a sustainable manner and really to kind of provide a better future for future generations, we need to act global. We have to think global. We have to find a way to identify ourselves as belonging to the same family. Like, I mean, I really love when Kalori, speaking from education, went into the vulnerabilities and the importance of acknowledge vulnerabilities and the issues, basic things, no? Or when Sarum speak about food. I mean, all of us at the end of the day, despite our colors, language, where we come from, we all are human beings that are tied by the same vulnerabilities. And as a human race, we will keep on facing more and more these global challenges. So this is really, if we think after Agenda 2030, is a great instrument for sustainable transformation, but it still was tied to the national context, like the national governments having a big role to deliver and to tackle in the challenges in national context. I think we need to move to a global governance context, a global responsibility context, and design any action in the future that will tackle those problems from a global perspective. And in that front, that is where I see the voice of young people being crucial, like to really help us to identify how we can work together, despite these artificial borders that we created a few hundred years ago. Thank you.
Thanks, Nedo. I'm so glad you took your UN hat off, because that was a great, very inspiring response of why young people need to be part of the conversations of the SDGs, but also how we prepare for the future. And that was a question actually from Sheba, George, to you both. There's now a question from Fasong Fidelis. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. I'm actually going to pose it to both of you because it's a tough one. So we know that young people, we need to invest in young people's future as well as in them now. And that future, is just as you described, Fernando, is so interconnected. We are so much more crowded and so much more together in the world than we were 50 years ago. But in this crowded space, young countries, especially from Africa, have the highest needs, the highest demands, the highest urgencies. So how can we move our global system to ensure young Africans are able to have greater voice in the international system, that we can actually move beyond rhetoric, beyond speeches into action? What recommendations can you give on how we can ensure young Africans, especially young countries, have greater influence at the UN? Maybe I will defer first to you, Fernando, and give Saru a bit of additional time. Over to you, Fernando.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a really great question. And I think like we, in the current world, resources are limited. We have to be realistic also on that front. And we need to help each other to identify which are the basic elements that will help us, whatever we do, have a huge impact. And I think currently, like the issue of education, the issue of access to technology are the key to ensure that our voices are global. So at least from my perspective, that is like really the first step. Like if we want to ensure that people from all different corners of the world have the possibility to contribute, and I think that to bring up their full capacities and skills to help us lead the world, access to, and that is access to education, access to technology is the most important. Always, understanding that there's a lot of other challenges. And again, when you go to the Agenda 2030, like almost all of the SDGs are key to help us have a sustainable transformation. But at this stage, if I would, like when I think about even myself, like I'm from Argentina, but I'm not even from Buenos Aires. I'm from a little villages in the middle of the country. And when I was 18, 19, internet was starting to be the big thing. And really, internet really helped me to connect with the world and to see, to be able to speak with people from different corners of the world and kind of feed my interest for global affairs. That I think, I keep on thinking that is key. And that is I will really call governments to ensure that this young people, new generation has at least access to those things. Then the rest will come after that. So yeah, that would be at least my hope, I guess, more than my advice.
That's an amazing hope, and we should be hopeful, as Ms. Yankee shared with us earlier. Saru, I wanted to pose the same question to you. What do you think about how the UN system can better involve young countries, especially young Africans, in the UN system and beyond?
Yeah, thank you. And I think I'll really highlight a lot of the young Africans working on job solutions in the Our Future Agenda Jobs group. They're laser focused on things like mentorship, on things like data skills, AI skills, but also, accessibility. I think there's a huge gap between rural and urban youth in many countries in Africa, certainly in many countries elsewhere in the world, such as South Asia. And we need to be, using different modalities that are appropriate to reach rural youth with the same opportunities. This might be the digital divide, but it might also be, short skills courses that are locally applicable, so they don't have to migrate to a salary job in a city. For example, Africa is facing I was just reading today, a huge famine crisis with the war in Ukraine and some of the supply chains. Africa also has some of the most rich arable land in the world, like over half. So how can we incentivize young people to, transition into agribusiness and farming, things that are not necessarily associated with growth and development in the ways that we think, but are actually critical to helping address some of the countries' and continents' challenges. So these kinds of innovative ways of thinking, nimble solutions that young people in the Jobs Action Group are pioneering, I think these are critical to bring to the table and elevate in areas like this and at the UN. Again, it goes back to what Kelechi has said, what others have said about more investment in opportunities, fellowships at the global level, certainly, but they have to be more meaningful. And I think they do still, I totally take Fernando's point, but I think they do still about needing a shift to global governance, but they need to still be nationally backed and nationally supported, because that's really where a lot of the power comes from. In strengthening, making sure that our global collective agenda is strong. So youth delegates, youth parliamentarians, these are all critical areas, and rural youth platforms to facilitate that, I think are one way to start as well.
I love those ideas, Saru, and there's a balance that we have to strike, I think, in having a voice as a country, as a community, even if you come from a village, that voice is still something that everyone can understand and hear, even at the international level. So you're both of you are spot on. I wanted to pick something up, Saru, that you just shared, which was around, trans-around conflict and violence, not just focused on Ukraine, but there are existing internal conflicts that have been exacerbated because of Ukraine, but also because of just global trends on climate, lack of resources, water scarcity, etc. And then also compounded by this huge demographic boom that will happen in Africa. My question really comes from Bamiki Bismirwa. Sorry, I'm butchering your name. The question is, how can young people contribute, especially from Africa, on issues around conflict and violence, especially those that are, either affected by violence themselves because they're refugees, but how do we make sure some of those concerns which by young people affected by violence are actually addressed by the international system? And then there's also an additional question of how do we just end wars? It's a noble goal. I mean, it's why the UN was created in the first place, but conflict is deeply integrated with inequality and all the issues of the SDGs. So it's a bit of a two-tiered question on how do we make sure that young people's perspectives on violence and conflict are addressed at the UN, but also how do we actually put an end to all wars, which was the real prerogative of the UN in the very beginning. I might go to you, Fernando. I'm sorry, I'm picking on you on the first questions because I feel Saru has the benefit of youthful experience to have a bit more time, but Fernando, over to you.
Thank you. It's a great question, and it's a very philosophical question. I think I don't know if we will ever be able to. I hope we will. And again, in the case of my generation, from my country or my part of the world, we almost were raised without any, war has been something very far, but not necessarily conflicts or violence, especially violence in society. So I do think that when we talk at the UN, something that you will listen a lot is oh, we have 3 pillars, and the 3 pillars are interconnected, sustainable development, human rights, and peace and security. And it sometimes seems like an empty statement, but I do truly believe that there is a lot of reality on that. I mean, you cannot have peace if there is a mass violation of human rights, and those human rights can go both from the social, from the political rights, but also the economic and social rights. It's not that if you don't have access to, as we were saying, access to water or food or extreme poverty, as Saru was highlighting at the beginning, how you can build a peaceful society based on the rule of law, where the essential needs of people is not being delivered by the state, by the government, be it at national or regional or local level. So I'm a true believer that these 3 things come together. Yes, when conflict is active in nature, so when a conflict is happening, for me, the most important is to bring peace, and that should be a natural call for anyone working in international relations. I mean, wars are unacceptable, violence is unacceptable, whoever the context, whoever the parties, peace should be the first objective. It's like when you have someone on the ER, okay, let's keep it alive first, and then we will see how improve her or his life. The same counts for societies, for countries, for governments. Let's seek peace in the moment of active conflict. But there is nothing better to prevent conflict that actually work in human rights and sustainable development. So ensure that people have their rights and their voice listened to, and that they live in a context where they can feel safe. And so yeah, that would be my hope. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. I mean, it was really, really powerful what you just shared on supporting countries that are on life support, whether that's because of development or inequality, but sometimes that manifests in conflict. And so you have worked in countries that have been on or are on life support. I would love to hear your perspectives on how do we make sure that we can address some of the instabilities in countries, but especially in young countries. Over to you, Saru.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really difficult challenge, but I also think that with the emergence of young leadership, I hope that it will at least become easier to talk about the interconnectedness of these issues, the interconnectedness of things like climate change for national security, and how it's not, climate change doesn't look at borders, as we've heard over and over again. I think we might be forced into it, but I think that young people are embracing that. We are really closely connected. We can see a social movement happening across the world and feel like it's happening in our backyard, or even get involved. And so I hope that that kind of interreliance, interdependentness that Fernando's pointing the way towards materializes in soon. I think there's rising, disarmament movements that have been forgotten for a long time, but may become even increasingly important. I also want to highlight, I'm not the next generation fellow on foresight, but I think we all probably need to be looking at foresight, and it's important across all of the themes we've talked about. What we can do now is intergenerationally invest together in planning for our collective future, and really need buy-in from older generations to facilitate that, so that these solutions, like the nimble, agile solutions that young people are proposing, are actually adopted before we get to that crisis point and breaking point.
Thanks so much.
Sorry,
Of course,
I might say something that I think is really related to this also, that we need to be aware, and this is evidence database. It's so much cheaper to invest in development and human rights as part of prevention that try to bring a war to an end, or to bring peace when the conflict started. So that is also like, even if you want to think from the very cold, heartless economy point of view, investment on human rights and development up front is the best way to avoid any conflict and to ensure that our societies do better.
Yeah, absolutely, Fernando. I mean, I was just at an event yesterday that said that justice leaders said it costs around $34 to provide access to justice per person, but conflict can sometimes cost anywhere between $5,000 to $2,000 per person. So the evidence is there in the data, and the imperative to act is so clear. I just wanted to pick up something on both of you, actually, and this is a question coming from Daria. It's the question on, do we believe our international instruments are still effective? Are they working? And I'm a firm believer, if it's not broken, keep chugging along. But I would also love to add to that question from Daria is there something new that we're not doing that we should be doing? And is there an international agreement that can help embody that, can help us push towards that? Saru, I'm going to give Fernando a bit of a break on picking on him for first questions. Saru, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I would say from my vantage point, as a young worker in civil society, so very far outside of multilateral spaces often, and then also talking to young people through the engine room, it can feel really frustrating and not efficient and broken and opaque. And I think it's only since participating in some of these intergenerational dialogues with leaders that I've started to understand that while it might be, stumbling in many places that we can all easily identify, there's still so much value in investing, in engaging in that process, in fixing what is broken and trying to forge something that's more inclusive, even if it means, rewriting certain areas completely, like tearing it down and starting again. But I think overall, the sum of its parts is really important and great for so many things, like, ensuring collective peace and justice and rule of law and human rights, to name a few, but also making sure we don't forget about, extreme poverty happening just because it's not happening right around the corner from us, realizing that there isn't any justice for us, there can never be any justice for us if, anyone in the world is suffering from these very basic deprivations. So I think I would recognize that frustration and really encourage you to keep voicing it, but also bring those solutions when you can, when you feel like you have the patience to do so, and really keep engaging and in building and correcting what's broken.
Thank you so much, Saru. I mean, there's nothing to defeat fatalism than solutions, and our international agreements are all about solutions. But I want to come back to you, Fernando. Do you think our international agreements are working? And if they're not working, what can we do better? What can we do that's new? Fernando?
No, I do think that they are really working. I'm a true believer on the international system as a way of providing solutions and global solutions. And again, I not only think that they're still working, but also that there's still we still think that it's a good way to bring solutions to global problems. Like, I don't know, like just, I mean, and when we say international instrument, we can think in so many different type of contexts and issues, but just to give you an example, like yesterday, the International Court of Justice issued a decision, like ending a bilateral dispute between Honduras between Colombia and Nicaragua, for example. Like 200 years ago, that would have been a war, like, or 100 years ago, that would be a war. And now, like you have countries that believe that a court that is seated like miles away from their country, where like both Spanish-speaking countries can go and rule out in a pacific manner, I mean, their differences, and that is as a way to solve international problems. So that shows that still those structures that were put in place more than 100 years ago or 100 years ago, they're still efficient and providing solutions. And like, and coming to our times, like very recently, member states, the governments came together from the world to finalize the BBNJ treaty, like beyond national biodiversity, beyond national jurisdiction, an international agreement to see how we can share and use in a sustainable manner and protect the biodiversity that is in the high sea. The high sea historically, traditionally, was been a lawless place. Like no country has sovereignty, and still we think that there is a way to improve our global governance through these international instruments. And so are they perfect? Definitely, they are not perfect, and there are limitations when it comes to certain new challenges that we are facing. But I do think that is the only way that we know, at least until now, to bring global solutions. And if anything, what we are facing is more and more global challenges. So we need stronger instruments and instruments that can be enforced at all levels to bring solutions to these global challenges.
No, it was absolutely fantastic, Fernando. And I think it also it echoes what Ms. Yankee was sharing about how we have to learn from our mistakes and that we have to innovate. And if we're always efficient, then there's no reason to always learn and innovate. So part of our reason is because our international system is always evolving to so many compound challenges. Fernando, I actually want to take you back to a question or a statement you shared before, and this is actually coming from Innocent, one of our young people on the chat. Fernando, you mentioned when you were 17 or 18, the internet was just getting out. And it's amazing that for a couple of 3-year-olds and 5-year-olds, that ChatGPT is at their fingertips, right? It's crazy. And I would love to just hear from you, Innocent, from the village or the community level, how can digital skills really transform their lives, and how can it really generate impact, value, and growth, even for the 5-year-olds with ChatGPT?
Thank you. I think that for our time, for our for where, as I think it was Visha who said that it's the big new revolution and AI. I think that the digital skills is the great equalizers. Like I think they're almost all around the world. People has a phone, and we have to ensure that they have access to technology, because once that you have the access, you can connect and you can be part of any global community. And I think that, again, going to what I was talking earlier, like the need to think global and to identify our joint humanity, we can do that just getting to know each other better. And the great thing about the digital world is that you don't need to travel. You don't need to get in an airplane to go to speak and get to know someone who is in the other side of the world, that you can just engage directly and on a one-on-one, or like we are doing now, like different parts and corners, and seeing that we all can agree and feel the same feelings. And so for me, I think that is the great advantage of the digital technologies, like they're really connected. Well, it has been improved during the 20th century, like the first movies, the first TV, it was a way to bring the world from one side to the other. I think now we can interact, and we need to ensure that everyone has access to those technologies to be able to feel connected and part of the community.
Thank you, Fernando. There is a great question from Vikash Saru that I want to pose to you. His question is, how can we work with countries to really promote a sense of shared thinking around democracy, human rights, etc. So our world becomes much more peaceful, especially as we are actually moving into greater conflict. So how can we make that a more convincing argument? And I think you can answer this quite well based on your own experience from poverty programming. Saru, back to you.
Yeah, I think as Fernando has highlighted, cost is such a powerful argument when you show the cost of not acting on something, and the cost of growing youth bulges that will be unemployed or underemployed only adds to that. And so it's not some pie in the sky number. We know this is coming. We can predict where young people will be the most concentrated, where simultaneously the lack of skills and jobs will be the most concentrated. And I think bringing those arguments, very evidence-based to governments are one of our strongest avenues in. Also, though, raising our voices through network building and organizing. Harshani, you mentioned at the beginning, each of the Next Generation Fellows, we've done, we've made an impact as a single person. But I think my impact is quite different than some of the other fellows, in that I'm really not an entrepreneur or a figurehead of like an organization. I really view myself as an organizer and somebody who works behind the scenes often to invest in the person who is leading the change, which is the participant in an extreme poverty program. And so that is a really valuable role that I think a lot of young people in this group can really play in their own communities of, organizing things, being the driving force behind change and investing in other people's skills and transformations, whether as teachers, as mobilizers, as community workers, health workers. All of these things are so valuable and no less important just because, it's not founding an organization or something like that. So again, bringing it back to that small local level change, that's a way that you can drive some of these conversations with governments as well.
And technology just got in the way. Thank you, Saru. That was fantastic. I do have one final question to both of you. This has been such a rich conversation, and the chat has been on fire. So thank you so much to all our participants. I have two questions. I'm going to just try and combine them from Alini and Innocent. And it's actually great because it's my last question to both you and Fernando and Saru. So the international system is so big. It has so many regional bodies. It actually works with private sector, civil society, young people. It's massive. Without it, we don't know how we would exist to tackle big problems like climate change or inequality. And my question to the both of you is, we're hearing across the board, even from both of you, about the power of intergenerational action and leadership, that young people are vital to the space, but they're also vital to the spirit across generations, that SDG 1 or SDG 5 or SDG 10 are all linked to young people and how they can unlock progress for all generations. So how can we get young people to the policy table so they can help design these solutions and implement the policy, especially as we work with different sectors and with different regional bodies, because the UN is a networker. It's so good at connecting, and sometimes it can miss connections, but overall pretty good. So Fernando, I'd love to turn to you on that question of how we can get young people to the policy table, especially for these two big moments, the SDG Summit and the Summit of the Future.
Thank you. Harsh question, because there are spaces, but spaces are limited. So I think that is more limited than we would like to. Is a reality. It also has to do with the nature of the UN, and at the end of the day, and despite and I think that this is one of the biggest flaws that we have. the biggest challenge that we want to tackle are global challenges, but as Saru was pointed out earlier today, like we are still very much rooted on the role of the national government. So, and national governments tend to be the ones representing the voice of their community, young people, older people, and we have been pushing and different, some governments are more open, some are not so interested to have other voices on the table. But the true thing is, like, if you see the line has been improved, and there is more and more spaces on the table. My advice is, like, until we get there, it's very important that young people organize themselves, that they speak to each other, that they have common messages, but the messages have substance. As I said, like, keep on asking for a place on the table, but also every moment that you have a place on the table, bring your ideas and use it to make concrete suggestions. And so yes, organize and use your numbers. I mean, like, I think, like, we started speaking and like at least this segment saying that it was Nushi who said, like, well, we are in front of the biggest youth population in history. That is a true fact. So yeah, you are the bosses. So as long as you organize yourself, you have the numbers. So that I think could be a game changer on ensure that your voice is taken seriously. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. So I'm going to go to my boss, Saru. Can you give some examples or share some guidance on that same question?
Yeah, I would echo Fernando and just say, really use the resources at your disposal, especially being connected to this group, right? There's so many things that are sent out by email or shared in conversations like this that I certainly wouldn't have access to otherwise. And I think really recognizing that, but also sharing it beyond, like, not, although there are limited spaces, really looking to grow a network rather than, promote, like, continue sort of growing in a space, like really sharing opportunities with other people is what I'm trying to say, and not being afraid of that, and actually recognizing that it makes the movement stronger. Fernando is right that we are going to have the numbers on our side. It might feel like we're knocking on a closed door, right now, saying, listen, we're going to be a majority, like, now and in the future, but it will happen, and we need to be ready when it does happen, right? And when we do have those windows when people are really listening to us for the solutions as the leaders of the future. So yeah, again, I would just say, use the resources at your disposal, make the most of every moment that you have to share very clear examples, evidence, ideas, as our three challengers have shared today, and grow networks, bring other people into it. Yeah.
That was an impassionate plea, last few minutes. Thank you so much, Fernando, Saru. It has been such a great conversation with both of you. I feel I've had my hope meter just filled. I feel inspired by both of you, and thank you for your time and your energy and your dedication to young people and to the movement for the SDGs and our future. So while we were busy chatting away, a lot of the young people on our event were actually giving feedback on their vision for the future. And before we do the big reveal, please do join the engine room if you're a young person. If you're excited by what you've heard, if you want to continue with us to the SDG Summit, all the way up to the Summit of the Future, there's a couple of ways that you can join us and follow this movement. And I also want to now quickly reveal the big picture of the future that all of us have collectively designed together with the big support of artificial intelligence to help paint this. The picture looks like this. So here are some of the couple of the images, and these were generated from some of the ideas that you shared, which was, we want a vision where more people are in positions of leadership, and that leadership represents where we come from, the countries that we come from, that we're able to advance gender equality for all generations, that we can create more healthier, inclusive, and peaceful communities for us as well as our grandchildren, that we can develop cities that can sustain not just us, but the future. And this future is green, this future is safe, and this future is free. So here are some of the expressions, and it's amazing that we have technology like this that can put pictures to these words. We'll share these photos with all of you at the end of this event. And then we have a couple of next steps for those that joined the call. So these steps are, you heard from Taylor, if you have a challenge to your world leader on what SDGs you'd like to be delivered by 2030, the time is now to share them, because that's exactly what the world leaders will be doing in September, is sharing their SDG commitments. So please share those by July 31st. You're very welcome to join our action groups, and our action groups are on themes like gender equality and climate and jobs. So if you want to connect with Next Generation Fellows or any of the other young people that you've heard, please join those meetings. And then we have a session just like this before the SDG Summit in September, and we're calling it a curtain raiser. So we're doing a bit of a reveal before the SDG Summit actually starts, as a way to actually influence world leaders and UN leaders before they actually get the party started, so we can at least chip in on some of their core messaging and core needs and your challenges to them. So stay with us, stay ready, and join us on this challenge to the SDG Summit. I want to spend, again, a big thank you to all the participants who stayed with us during this moment. And thank you so much for your time and your dedication. And a huge thank you for my team, Taylor, Inez, Lewis, Rochelle, who were so remarkable in putting this together, as well as all our engine room members and our Next Generation Fellows. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.